I'm talking with Kevin. Kevin, tell me about Four Horsemen.
Okay, so Four Horsemen is a visual novel about the immigrant experience. And you play as four immigrant teenagers in their new homeland who find a abandoned World War II era machine gun bunker and turn it into a clubhouse. And your decisions throughout the game determine what kind of community will grow out of this clubhouse. And the central gimmick behind this is that at the beginning of the game you pick one of 12 countries, and that country will be the one that your characters are from. And all of these 12 countries play differently.
Interesting. So what kind of country are they in that they've gone to?
The game picks for you based on the country that you have picked. And these are these pairings are designed to reflect be a reflection of real world immigrant experiences. So for example, you could be a bunch of Arab teenagers living in an analog to the United States. You could be a bunch of Japanese teenagers, American teenagers living in Japan in a kind of microcosm, in a reflection of life in military bases in Okinawa.
Yeah.
You could play as various ethnic minorities in China, and the way that I like to frame it is that the countries are all fictional, but the people are all real.
Gotcha. What's the gameplay style like?
So it is a visual novel, so it's very heavily narrative. There's a lot of text, but because of this, we have a lot more flexibility with the story. A lot of the choices are very, very significant, and there's also a lot of crafting, and your crafting will guide story decisions.
All right. Before we get into playing it, a couple more esoteric questions.
Sure.
Why are games meaningful to you?
Oh man. Fortunately, I have a prepared answer to this question.
Nice. Okay.
So, a lot of people look at something like Four Horsemen, and they're sort of like, why didn't you make this like a book or film or something that would maybe be a little more accessible to people who are used to hearing about immigrant stories? And my answer to that is, games are unique. People talk a lot about how games are unique because they're interactive and because how they immerse you, but a lot of what people don't focus on as much, except when you talk about narrative games, is how choice plays such a big part in that. It's one thing to have to passively follow along the story of an individual, say a refugee or a wealthy immigrant, or all these different sort of immigrant experiences, and just sort of follow along as they make all these decisions and not really engage with it at all. You're just sort of watching someone else's life. When you play this game or any other game that deals with these sort of social issues, you're placed in those situations which create consequences that lead to outcomes that are familiar in real life. So for example, a lot of stereotypes among immigrants around the world is they're lazy, they don't work very hard, they don't care about education, they don't invest in a country's culture. Well, I wanted to sort of show people, not just tell people, but show people how those perceptions are created even when they aren't true. How you end up in a situation where other people look at you and they're like, oh, you're lazy. So in this game, there are a lot of places where I could just have an NPC walk up and say oh, those kids are a waste of space. But I don't do that. Instead, it just sort of you do something you're exhausted from working all day because you're poor and it's hard to make money and whatever, and you sit down to take a rest and somebody's like, oh, you're lazy. And they're like, oh, okay, then you have this sort of deeper understanding of how people end up that way.
Now, do you have a specific game besides this one that is meaningful, specific to you? It's maybe your touchstone for
a lot of them actually, and this game, its inspirations moved me very deeply. I was a really big fan of This War of Mine, which, I mean, mechanically it's not quite like this one, but it's treating those serious topics in experiential ways, putting you in this position where you logically figure out yourself, the optimal solutions to problems lead to things that you see culturally in real life, for people who are in this sort of wartime kind of environment. That was really deeply moving to me. Cart Life, which I actually could not finish because it touched me too deeply, is how all the little individual pieces of it are very mundane. You're doing things like folding newspapers, you're looking for a cat, you're trying to pay your rent. But all together, they kind of add into this sort of crushing gestalt, this sort of feeling of this overall feeling of poverty that you can't get from like a single moment. Like all the mechanics just like sort of additively producing this experience. That's something I really like strove to do in this game as well.
That's awesome.